Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be joining us from, and welcome to this very final and special episode of Wise at Work Virtual Communities. My name is Parneet Pal. I'm the Chief Science Officer at Wisdom Labs, and I want to welcome you all to this session on overcoming negativity and judgment with our very, very special guest, Eve Ekman. Now, it's just been an honor and privilege for us to have you join us week after week since March for these sessions. But if you're new to Wisdom Labs, we are a San Francisco-based company solving for stress, burnout, and loneliness in the workplace using the science of mindfulness, resilience, and compassion. And in our work, we work with companies and organizations worldwide to build communities of practice just like this. And our aspiration is to improve mental, emotional, and social well-being there. We have been so lucky and grateful to have our network of experts and teachers who've been generously donating their time and wisdom for these sessions. And so I really want to encourage all of you in the chat room, in addition to telling us where you're from, please start asking your questions throughout the session, and I can take a couple of those at the end and post them to Eve. It's now my delight to introduce Dr. Eve Ekman. Eve is the director of Cultivating Emotional Balance training program. She's a senior fellow at the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. She's a volunteer clinical faculty at the University of California, San Francisco Department of Pediatrics. She's a widely published researcher and teacher. She's trained as a medical social worker in the emergency department of San Francisco General Hospital, but has really extensive training in emotion awareness and meditation intervention. We are also very lucky because Eve has been part of the faculty at Wisdom Labs, and all of you have access to the Wise at Work app. I highly, highly recommend you check out Eve's series. She's done a 30-day series on emotional fluency, which in my opinion is some of the best training that you will get on this subject. What I most appreciate about Eve, as I've gotten to know her both as a friend and as a colleague, and what you're going to find in this session is that she's precise, she's scientifically accurate. She also makes her teachings very relatable and practical, but she delivers them beautifully because it's coming from not only a whole lot of heart, but really from the depth of her practice, from her personal meditation practice. So without further ado, welcome Eve. Thank you so much. We're so grateful that you're joining us for this session, and it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Parneet. Lovely to see you, and nice to see the rest of the Wisdom Labs family there on chat. Really lovely to see folks. Really looking forward this morning to talking with you all about actually some of the more difficult emotions that are always present. They are not here just because of COVID and national and international civil unrest. Oh no, the telephone. I actually have a landline. We're gonna have to give it a moment there. Hopefully it will hang up. So these emotions, these difficult emotions are actually with us no matter what, always arising in the context of our relationships to and from work. Thank you to my partner who picked up the phone. Sorry for that interruption. But especially in this time of acute challenge and difficulty, we notice that emotions arise such as frustration, such as feelings of judgment or superiority. And so I think what's really worthwhile to start thinking about before we even delve into these specific emotions are, what are emotions? And many people think of emotions as the feeling. I feel bad, I feel good, I have a sense of I don't like this, or I really like that, I really want more of that. What I think is really important for us to understand is emotions are actually a process. So not just a feeling, not just feeling good or feeling bad. Emotions actually are a trigger, an experience, and a response. So when we feel something like frustration, for example, we have a reason why we feel frustration. I would love to hear from folks in the chat. What are some of your reasons for frustration in the last couple days? Generally speaking, in the work environment, there are some triggers that we know well. When there's a sense of injustice, maybe we've been passed over for a promotion that was really felt as though it was justifiably ours. Maybe someone takes credit for work we're doing or misrepresents us. then that can rise to a feeling of real frustration. We can also have a sense of frustration in the work setting when there's just so much inefficiency. So in the healthcare settings where I've often worked, that has to do with paperwork. So just a feeling of frustration because, wow, there is just so much more to do at the level of paperwork than I can get done. We may also feel this frustration in this contemporary environment because the landline rings when we're trying to do a morning call and we didn't even realize the landline was hooked up. So we have these little frustrations that can occur just when our systems aren't working. I think it's really challenging at this moment, especially when we're all operating on our computers and internet, which have variable efficiency, actually. I'm seeing some folks here saying not being recognized for their achievements, inconsistent decision-making, all the distractions of working from home. I can totally relate to all of those. And so there's this level of frustration that can arise. And for most of us, we'd like for it to just disappear. Now, before we move on to looking at two other challenging emotions, I want to offer something very, I think, useful in terms of defining our emotions. We often think of emotions as something that are good and pleasant to feel, or bad and negative, something I just don't want to feel, like get them out of the way. I'd like to offer from the field of contemplative science, so from the field that's really integrating Western psychological and Eastern contemplative approaches, a different way. So how about we think of emotions as constructive or destructive in how they are enacted? So there's no denying it doesn't feel good. In fact, it feels negative to have frustration and anger. And yet we know that that frustration and anger is also behind a good deal of the social justice movements that are transforming the landscape of this country. Without that frustration enacted in a constructive way, we would actually never be able to remove obstacles and move forward. So when we think of our emotions in that way, instead of this is negative and bad, please get it away from me, I don't want to feel it, get that distraction away from me in my home, I can't handle this inconsistent decision making, what it's telling us actually is some useful information about our environment. And what we're then given the opportunity to do is figure out how can we constructively respond. Now, of course, this isn't ideal. And for many of us, when we have a strong emotion, it is as though, as Danny Goleman describes, we are hijacked by our emotion. We have zero ability to recognize we are emotional in the moment. And it's as though our entire world is filtered through that narrow lens of emotion. And I want to also give you some information here I hope is helpful, which is that is the very design of our emotions, to operate outside of our conscious awareness. If we had to think before we became emotional, in our environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, we would not have survived. We would not have made it until now. And even though a lot of the strength of our emotions that are taken from that time when we lived tribally with one another is no longer useful. We don't need to respond with such intense anger towards our friends or loved ones who are making noise in the background, or our family members. We don't have to have that same sense of fight with them. But that's just how they evolved, and that's how they will show up in our contemporary environment. And to give ourselves a little bit of understanding around the strength of our emotions, in addition to an emotion like anger, which has such power and strength and doesn't feel good, we can also find that immediately after that anger, we succumb to a feeling of regret or guilt or even shame. And so how do we work with and understand, have compassion around our difficult emotions so that we can lean into them, we can learn from them, we can understand the messages they want to share with us? So far I'm talking really about how to look at our emotions as constructive or destructive, as well as how to understand them as a natural, in fact, evolutionarily kind of instigated strength that we feel them in. Now what I want to do is talk about two emotions you may be not as familiar with, but ones that I assure you are quite common in this time, of course in all time, but really in this time of the pandemic and a lot of compressed sense of acute stress, as well as with a lot of the challenges in our country, at least in the United States, as we're slowly reopening, and there's a whole variety of different political implications as a result of that, and the huge social and civil unrest going on in our country. So the first emotion I want to talk to you about is one of contempt. And this emotion is universal, meaning we don't need to learn it. It's inborn. It happens to be something that we can recognize on the facial expression of anyone across the world. That is also shared with anger, fear, sadness, and enjoyment. Contempt, however, has this unique flavor of feeling judgment. So the facial expression of contempt, I'll show you here, is one in which we think we know better. And actually, we're trying to show someone that through our expression of emotion. So emotions are not only something we feel, not only something that direct how we see the world, they're also really designed in a way to communicate what we're feeling. Far before we had the capacity for language, again, and these environments of our evolutionary adaptiveness, we were communicating to others just through our emotion, facial expressions, and our vocalizations. You can imagine with contempt also something like, yeah, I know better. That whole kind of demonstration that's going on. And with contempt, it is a way for us to show we don't agree with the way that someone is acting. We think that, in fact, they could be doing better. It's not anger. Anger has an aggressivity in which we're trying to control or shift, and anger actually has the possibility of leading to conflict. With contempt, we're actually trying to avoid conflict, but still show someone that we don't approve of what they're doing. Now, contempt maybe can be constructive, right? If we're able to communicate to ourselves and to others, wow, I don't adhere with the way that you're acting. Can anybody in the chat share with me when you have felt contempt recently, especially at work? I'd say with contempt at work, I am embarrassed to say that I sometimes have contempt when people's internet or microphone isn't working well. Even though I kind of recognize they can't control it, there's nothing they can do, but I have this feeling of, I can't even hear you on this call. And immediately arises contempt before I'm able to clearly look at it. And what I can reflect on then is, wow, it really matters to me to be able to hear from this person. I actually want to know what's going on with them. So that's contempt, this whole kind of range of emotions that creates judgment. The reason I'm highlighting it is because though it does have important information for us, it does create a sense of distance. It can get in the way of our empathy or understanding for another person. I'm seeing people who are lack of management. What else here? People who don't mute themselves. I totally relate to that. When a coworker complains about the same thing over and over, right? And that coworker example is so dear because we probably care about that person and we want them actually to be free of their difficulty and their struggle, but that kind of repetition of the same thing, and maybe we feel they aren't doing enough. Now, contempt has another emotion that's somewhat similar to it, but maybe even stronger and more difficult, and that's the emotion of disgust. When we feel disgust, it's not just that we feel better than, we actually feel different than. When we have disgust, we are othering someone. So when we have disgust towards the behaviors of a politician or group of people, it's not just that we think they should do better or we think they could do better. We think they're not even capable of doing better. Like they are foreign, they are toxic. It is believed that disgust is an emotion that arose purely from something biological, right? So there is this rotting piece of food. I'm showing disgust, like, oh, get that away from me. And it evolved over the course of our human history into something that we also feel towards people. Now, I think we have to be especially vigilant towards our feelings of disgust. Our feelings of disgust are dehumanizing. When we have a feeling of disgust towards someone or a group of people, we are really on the verge of having a bias, a prejudice, one that feels solid and fixed. Those people will never understand. The way they act, right? And so we need to investigate in ourselves, what are we missing out on with our feeling of disgust? Now, I assure you, you will never get rid of these emotions. They will arise. But again, we come back to how can we constructively enact them? What is our opportunity when we feel disgust towards someone's behavior? What we're invited to do is examine, like, wow, this is a very strong feeling you're having. What is your need? What isn't getting met? What is going on that you feel threatened, that you feel overwhelmed by this person or group of people? Where is the opportunity for compassion? So we're going to do a really brief little practice here. We had some really wonderful examples already shared in the chat. So I'm going to invite everyone. Can you think of a certain example? Maybe one interaction with a colleague or something you've read in the news. There's plenty there to be upsetting. Something that evokes this feeling of contempt, meaning superiority, or maybe even disgust. I can't abide by the way that person is acting. It's disgusting to me. I want us to come up with one example and then practice 2 different emotion regulation strategies. Actually 3. The first, identifying that emotion. So that's emotion granularity. The second is recognizing the embodied experience or our interoception with that emotion. What is it like to feel the emotion? And then the third is we're going to apply a reappraisal. And that means we bring our mind around to look at that emotion. And we bring it around with compassion to understand that this is hard for us and that this is hard for maybe the person who's experiencing it. Okay, so we'll do this briefly. We could imagine as though this was something that just happened to us. So I invite you to just close your eyes gently. And with that closing of the eyes, it's a signal to bring our attention inward. And then take a moment to really bring forth this memory, this experience in which you felt either contempt or disgust, some kind of othering. I can't believe they would, or that group of people did. Remember how you encountered this. Maybe it was through email, maybe it was reading the news, maybe something someone directly said to you. And do you remember what it felt like in the body and the mind? Maybe you notice certain areas of the face, like the brows knitting together and down. Maybe there's some tension or tightness around the lips, the jaw. See if you can recall and even experience now. What was the felt experience of having this emotion arise? And notice and keep noticing whatever can be noticed through the field of the body. Notice how it might shift and change feelings in the chest, the belly, through the lower back, through the upper back and shoulders, the neck and throat. And take a moment here to just recognize that these sensations are unpleasant. Whether they're subtle or strong, that feeling, this sense of disgust or contempt is not pleasant, not enjoyable. And then taking a moment to bring this person or persons to mind. And imagine as though you could zoom out from the situation, look at it from many different angles. Imagine it's a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, when the acuity of the emotion may feel less strong. And invite that same sense of compassion that you had towards yourself, of just recognizing it doesn't feel good. See if you can hold this person, their behaviors and their actions with that compassion. Not justifying, not allowing, but just recognizing, wow, there is some pain there. This person may or may not realize the pain they are inflicting. So again, holding yourself with compassion as well as this experience and the person or persons responsible for it. Not because they deserve or are justified in their behaviors, but because holding the contempt or disgust is so hard, so distancing for us. Let's train our hearts as hearts that can be open, hearts that can be accepting, hearts that can have the strength of compassion. And then 1 or 2 more breaths here back in the body. Noticing what might have shifted and changed as we brought forth this emotion and then applied compassion to it. Gently wiggling our fingers and toes, let's blink our eyes back together. So I'd love to hear any questions from folks about working with these challenging emotions.
Thank you so much, Eve. What I really loved about that practice, and we do have questions that I'm going to ask in a second, but I just wanted to just take in this phrase that you said, where is the opportunity for compassion? I think for me, that really stood out. That's going to be my takeaway, at least in any situation when I'm feeling that, where is the opportunity for compassion? So thank you for that. We had Lisa who asked, if one is neurodivergent, they may or may not recognize the facial emotion of contempt. Any advice for people who do not use visuals to modulate or decipher emotions?
Yeah, there's a couple questions in there. We are not recognizing our emotions by our facial expression. We are recognizing our emotions by our felt experience. So you don't need to recognize facial expression to recognize you are emotional. That is a subjective experience psychologically and in the body. And then there are wonderful training programs using facial expression that can absolutely increase people's capacity for recognizing facial expression empathy. Great deal of work around that, both at UCSF and other universities. So I imagine that Lisa might know about that, but if not, if you want to increase the empathy for facial expression, really studying facial expression. My dad has a program of micro expression training, but there are many throughout the world that help people identify those larger and smaller facial expressions if you want to know someone else is feeling it. But if you want to know you're feeling it, no need to look at facial expression.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eve. We have another question from Kirsten who says, the disgust and contempt that I hold in my heart is for racists and white supremacists. I'd really struggle to find compassion for them. Any advice?
Yeah, I understand that. It's definitely been a theme and topic among some of the communities I'm working in right now. And the idea is here that, again, our disgust and our contempt for people whose behaviors are harmful, it actually prevents us from the opportunity when there may be an opening to communicate effectively with those people. If our goal is to be able to truly shift and change and hopefully impact the biases and prejudices that exist among these individuals and groups, then we have to actually be able to be on the ready for when that opportunity arises. And though we don't have to agree with them, we can hold actually more with equanimity the fact, right, with more spaciousness, that we all are humans who want to not suffer and want to be happy. We may do this in totally ridiculous ways from our opinion, from harmful ways, that's clear. And yet, if what we want is to transform the world, we have to start exercising our compassion. And so I would say, don't start with racists. That's a really hard one. Start with, things that are slightly more subtle, but still annoying or provoking to you, and practice compassion there and kind of work your way up. What allows us to have that kind of disgust and contempt is really not understanding others. And so I'm sure, I don't know personally, but I'm sure there's resources out there to kind of get behind the psychology of supremacy and racism. Not so that we adhere to it, but so we understand what is the pain or suffering leading to those views, which are so harmful.
Thank you, Eve. We've had Shanaz sort of asking a question along the theme of, initially she mentioned all of this sounds good, but it also sounds very difficult. So, and then a follow-up question, and maybe Eve also speaking to, we all, based on our life experiences and our genetics, we have varying capacities of how we're able to navigate our emotions. Could you speak a little bit to the capacity for training and building those skills, while also addressing what Shana says, that, this exercise that we just did would be beneficial to do after the stressful event, but how does one control emotion when the person is present and triggers the nervous system adversely?
Yeah, there are no magic bullets. There are no pills for this. This requires daily training throughout the day, all the time. And bringing ourselves into just this, I hope, feeling of real kind of excitement and enthusiasm to get to know our emotions. That is really, really, really crucial. Really getting a sense of, I'm so curious to know more about my triggers. I so want to understand my embodied experience. I so want to see when I respond in a way that's constructive or destructive. And we don't need to do that sitting on a cushion meditating, but that helps. It's like a laboratory, because while we're meditating, the mind is still moving, and we can find an opportunity to respond to the emotions that come up, the thoughts that come up, and give ourselves the practice there of, oh, wow, there's that thought of that interaction I had yesterday that was so painful. What's that like in the body? How much does my mind want to keep playing with it? Can I just come into the body? There's no real simple way except for close observation. And I just think that beginning the path of emotion awareness, or continuing the path of emotion awareness for many people, really requires a lot of self-compassion and patience. It takes a long time to shift these habits that are from our family or from our genetics. So we have to have a real sense of care and gentleness towards ourselves. That's my number one. You need courage and gentleness to do so. And there are many training programs out there. I teach, as Parneet said, cultivating emotional balance, and you can use simple mindfulness practices. There's anything you can do to increase your vocabulary of emotion.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Chief. That was really enlightening. I know we're coming up on time, so I just want to ask if people want to stay in touch with you, find out more about your work, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I'd say like going through, I have a website, which is my name, evekman.com. I rarely put out a newsletter, once or twice a year, but also Cultivating Emotional Balance. We have a list of all the trainings happening. So that website too, people can sign up for the mailing list and get more information about the live events coming up.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eve. And, as we're closing, I just want to again remind folks that you can get in touch and learn from Eve's teachings directly on the Wise at Work app. Please do check out her series on emotional fluency. And she's also done many other guided practices on the app. And, this is a bittersweet moment for us. This is the last Wise at Work virtual community session. So I just want to take this time to say thank you so much from the bottom of our heart to everybody who's been showing up week after week. We've just been honored with your presence and your generosity and just your openness to learning with us and to connecting with us. But we also want to say this is not the end. We will be putting out much more programming in the future. So please do stay in touch. You can always write to us at info@wisdomlabs.com, or just check out what we're up to. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And we're going to be talking with many other experts in the future and sharing a lot of our work. Thank you. I mean, it's again, as I said, it's kind of bittersweet. It's been so lovely to have all of you joining us every week. So thank you again. And Eve, this was just perfect. This was a perfect note to end on. And I cannot wait to see all the fantastic work that you're going to be putting out in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, folks. We'll see you somewhere else. Take care.